Hello, everyone. Once again, you are welcome to this family. And this is the book launch. This is the book launch. Let me introduce you to the author. Sister Sarah Linda Ajafu is a registered nurse and a healthcare leader with a master's degree in nursing leadership and management. Alongside her medical career, she is a historian, an independent researcher devoted to recovering and documenting African and biblical histories, with a special focus on the Ebe people of West Africa. She has lived and worked in Ghana, Togo, Mali, and the United States, experiences that have shaped her cross-cultural perspective and deepened her commitment to African heritage and historical preservation. Sarah speaks Ebe, Twi, English, French, and Spanish. Oh, hola. Allowing her to engage directly with a wide range of oral traditions, archivals, sources, and scholarly communities. She also serves in ministry as a teacher in the children ministry at the EP Church in Takoma Park, Maryland, PA, where she's dedicated to nurturing faith, identity, and moral grounding in the next generation. Through her writing and research, Sarah seeks to restore African voices to the global historical record and eliminate the enduring spiritual and cultural legacy of her people. Without much ado, I introduce to you our beloved Sister Linda Sarah Ajafu. You might be able to talk about not what you listen more. That's really I'll ask questions about the book. Okay. And my first question to you is, what inspired you to write this book? Look, I don't so well a chosen people, the ever from Kana. If you want to talk about your Brenania, I can't bring it to the other time is yes. That's why I sit there. What you are? Very Spanish. Okay, so what inspired me to write a book? So being a culture and history enthusiast, I like to read about African history, especially in the history. But I found that there was something lacking, which was that our history seems to be limited to colonial era. The pre-colonial history was quite scant, and the information out there was not very, it wasn't backed by evidence. That was a problem for me. I came across a group who was talking about Black people being descendants of Israelites, not necessarily being related to the Jews that we know today, but actually having a bloodline descendants from the ancient Israelites. So the difference is that the Jews that we have today, they have it as a religion. But there are also people who do not practice the religion of Judaism, but have ancestry that takes them to the ancient Near East. I took to asking people around me, the elders around me, to find out if there was any validity to this claim. Because I need the evidence to be able to actually, believe anything. I'm kind of like Thomas. Anyway, you are his twin. I'm his twin. So I asked my grandmother, and she said, well, she didn't know for sure, but she had also heard it. But also, she knows that her old father had a way of worship that was quite peculiar, where he would stop all of his work on Friday evening. He wouldn't work on Saturday, and Saturday was called Judombe, which means the day of rest. So he wouldn't work on Saturday. And none of the people in the hut, his compound, would work. He would spend most of his time in a hut. And they thought that he had idols in the hut. And no one was allowed to enter the hut but him himself. There was a secret place for him. And it had an enclosure before you got into the hut. And in the enclosure, in the center of it, there was a little bowl that was, filled with water and some eggs that he used to do his ablution, his purification before he entered into the hut. And so they never knew what was inside that hut, what he was meeting with, until he died. When he died, they entered the hut and there was nothing. There were no idols. There was just a little stool which he sat on, and one of the claims that he made was he was a descendant of Abraham because they were trying to Christianize him. The missionaries were trying to Christianize him, but he resisted many times. But at the end of his life, glory be to God, he accepted Christ, Jesus. So to me, that was very, interesting. And so I started really doing research. I went into archives. Everywhere I can find anything about African history, pre-colonial African history, I was there. And so, and over the course of about 8 years, I've been gathering my ideas and, and doing the research on it. And by God's grace, this is the result, which is okay. In your book, you employ connecting between the early history and ancient Israel. What are some of the most compelling pieces of evidence that support this? Yeah. So there are mountains of evidence. Some of them we all do. Number one, circumcision. The elders practice their infant circumcision on the 8th day. Traditionally, nobody told them that. The missionaries they also said that. In fact, most of the missionary organizations were against circumcision because they held seriously to Paul's teachings, which says neither circumcision or uncircumcision are there much. So as far as that goes, they had nothing to do with it. And when it comes to even those of our people who were taken out of us and enslaved and taken elsewhere, they were actually forbidden from circumcising because it was seen as something that would damage the body of a healthy slave. Uh-huh. So circumcision, specifically on the 8th day, is very uncommon. You have Muslims. They circumcise because it's an ordinance in their religion. They circumcise in pre-pubescent years and adolescent years, so from 12 years on. They don't circumcise on the 8th day. There are Africans who also circumcise traditionally. You find them mostly in East Africa and in Southern Africa. They also circumcise in the pre-pubescent and adolescent years. But when you come to West Africa, especially those of us who are in Ghana, Togo, Benin, Nigeria, we all mostly circumcise before the end of toddlerhood. The latest is like 5 years old, right? The events, if you wait too long, they'll say, oh, so they will insult you. And they didn't learn this from anywhere. So where did they get this from? We have to ask ourselves these questions. Just because somebody didn't come and say in our textbooks in school that we are the Israelite does not mean that the evidence is not there. Now, this one really shocked me was the practice of the blood avenger, the avenger of blood within a society. This was before before colonial times, before the Europeans came. We had this system where if someone committed a fatal crime, the kin of the victim had the legal right to persecute that person and go and even end their lives. But there were some towns that were known as no-go towns. If he's able to escape to that town, you cannot go and avenge that blood on him in that town. And I was taken aback when I read this, and that one particularly, I found it in a book called The Ever People of German Togo, and the author is Jacob Spears rather. Jacob Spears was a German missionary and anthropologist. Okay, he is instrumental in writing the first Bible in Hebrew. Right, he worked with many other people, but his closest assistant was called Ludwig Ajaklo. And Ludwig Ajaklo was very versed in the culture and the history of the Ebers and, of course, the Eber language. So he assisted him a lot. Jacob Spears did not he did not think that the Ebers are Israelites. But if you read his book, you can see that he is mentioning the practices of the Israelites from the Bible. He even talks about our migrations. He never mentions anything about Israelites to concerning us, but his writing, the book is about 900 pages long. Wow. It's on Amazon if anybody is interested. Yeah. But he also talks about our spirituality. All the idol worship and voodoo and all this stuff. That's another hallmark of the Israelites. That's exactly what God told them not to do. And if they did it, this and this will happen to them. And we can see it in Deuteronomy chapter 28. It lists all the blessings if we are obedient. And it lists all the curses if we are not obedient, including slavery and colonization. It specifically says you will be taken into bondage again, but on ships. So that talks about the first bondage, which was Aboyoniba. The Ebers call Egypt traditionally Aboyoniba. Why do we call it Aboyoniba? Because it's the land of bondage. And we can see it in a book written by an Eber called Charles Mamata, was published in 1976. It talks about the second bondage, which is what we saw in the transatlantic slave trade, which is the one that our people were taking on ships. Because the prophecy was that he will go in bondage again on ships this time. So those are some of the things that really floored me. But you can see the book is thick. It's over 300 pages, but this does not have everything about the Israelite origins of the Ever people. This is just the beginning. And so my hope is that this is a seed that will encourage us to dig into these kinds of things and not only rely on what has been handed down to us through the colonial education system.
And my last question. You also call the repentance and return to the Most High God. What does that look like in the practical terms?
Yeah. So that's a very important question. In all of this searching, finding ourselves, knowing who we really are, then what? That's the most important part. And what that means is that this is a call to us to come back to our original selves and to come back to our God. The Ebers indigenously only used to worship one God, which is Mauga. They didn't used to have any other deities. The Togo, right now, if you go into an average home in Evangelical, it's easy to find 500 deities, right, being worshipped by individuals. That's how far back we are falling. All the way from the time of our ancestor Abraham. That is when we really streamline our worship to Mauga, and he has made a covenant with us. He didn't make the covenant with anybody else. He made it with us. That's not giving us superiority. That doesn't make us high over anybody else. That just means that we have a mandate. We have a responsibility, and we are going to be held accountable. Our ancestors, even in colonial times, knew that they were not supposed to worship any other god but the Most High. And they told this to the missionary. Actually, to two missionaries. One was French, he was Catholic, and to the Catholic guy, the Catholic missionary was interviewing a priest in Dahomey, in what is the area called Wida. We know that all those places, they were all Ebe, and they still are. We are all from the great big Ebe family. Whether we are four, we are this, we are sometimes we are in the best, cluster. We are all from the great big Ebe family. So he asked him, you know that Only God is supposed to be worshipped. Only the Most High, the great God, who is the creator of everything, who you call Mawu, which means he exceeds all else. Mawu kata. So why don't you leave the Python worship and come and only worship the Most High? And he told him, if I do that, my people will stone me. This was in the 1700s, 18th century. This is the account he told. The second account was from an elder. This one was the German missionary who was interviewing the elder. And he asked them, so where did the deities come from? And they told him, our ancestors used to only worship the great God, the Mauga, who now it seems like we have pushed them back, right? But there was a time when we could no longer hear from Mauga, and they gave an allegory about the sky. They said there was a time when some women were pounding their fufu. Fufu is an ever dish. Don't let them tell you it's a can. Some women were pounding fufu, and the pestle, the back of the pestle, was constantly hitting the sky. The sky was low down, and over time, the sky got so rotated it moved far away. And that is how we lost communication with our God. Another allegory, and I'll end soon. Another allegory they said was the sky used to be very low, and when the people got so used to it being so low that when they ate, after they ate, they would bite their hands on the sky, dirtying the sky all the time, and this irritated the sky, and so the sky left them. And they said, yeah, that is how we also lost direct communication with the Mawada. And this is in the Bible. When the Israelites kept on going after idols, God stopped being in their midst. He used to walk in their midst. But the condition was that you cannot bring any filth. You have to be holy because what I am holy. And our ancestors repeatedly violated that rule. You see, and so we no longer. And so they said to Jacob's spear. So this is why we felt like there was a communication gap, and we had to resort to the deities to be as intermediaries between us. That also shows that our people weren't necessarily in the land when Jesus was there. They must have already fled before the arrival of Jesus. They must have already settled deep within Africa. So they didn't have that, first-hand evidence of Jesus. So they felt that they had to go through intermediaries in order to have access to the Most High. So this is a call for us to wake us up and realize that going through intermediaries is not what He wants for us. That's actually pushing us away further. He already sent His Son, whom the world called Jesus Christ. The Eves call Him Yesu, and that's actually an indigenous Ewe name for Him, which was there in the 1400s before the missionaries arrived. How do we know this name? Because it was already part of our custom. It was part of our naming practices. It wasn't brought to us. So naturally, we have that name. So we need to realize that this is our way back to Mauga in order for us to be restored. The Bible says creation waits for the manifestation of the sons of God. We are the sons of God. If we are restored back to Mauga and we are back, He said He will gather us. If we come back, right, the world will follow. I sincerely believe that if the Evans can get it right, the world will be right.
One question from the audience. I follow you on Facebook. So what kind of feedback are you getting online?
So, thankfully, a lot of the ever you follow me on Facebook back home. And most of them are shocked and they are happy to know that their story is actually in the Bible. They are not just a sideline, a side piece. They are not descendants of Ham. We used to be taught that we were descendants of Ham, which is actually not backed by evidence. That came from the Hamitic theory, which was pushed by some people for a certain purpose in the times of first the Inquisition, where they were deporting blacks from Europe and other places, and then during the slavery era. So they really like it, and they rejoice. I get feedback from them constantly. People want to have one-on-one with me. If I had so much time, I would with everyone. So that's why I put a lot of the information, a lot of my teachings on Facebook, on YouTube, on TikTok, wherever. We have to go where our people are. So wherever they are, that's where I go. Yeah, the ones who don't understand it really, they are few, and To be frank with you, it comes mostly from people who are non-Evers. So that's a non-factor.
When I come to the other opinion,
Our language is very much connected to ancient Hebrew. I am sure most have not heard about it. Our language is very much connected to ancient Hebrew. Naturally, many of the African languages are connected to ancient languages. However, when you see it, you will be shocked. I was able to do a specific research on the linguistics aspect, and I compared the Ewe and the ancient Hebrew pictographs. The ancient Israelites, they didn't write in the Hebrew writing that you know today. They wrote in pictographs. Those are drawings, just like we continue to do today. If you look at our kente cloth, you see that we have images in it. Those were ways of communication. That's pictograph. Our name is it's a communication. No to contact it's a communication. I was able to find that there are 22 ancient Hebrew pictographs, and each of those pictographic characters have their meaning exactly in the Ewe, and it means exactly what is depicted, which doesn't happen with any other language. It happens with Ewe. So,